Oh, I should turn this on. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our second general meeting of the quarter. I don't think I have anything to say, but I do hope everyone's midterms are going well, all sorts of assignments, whatnot. Hope you all are staying safe and, being careful with everything happening. And yeah, if you haven't already signed in, I'm going to drop the sign-in sheet one last time. Make sure to get those activity points, but let's get started. If you have any questions throughout our presentation and whatnot, feel free to drop your question in the chat, please. Thank you. And if you haven't already noticed, we do have our live transcripts for y'all on Zoom. So in case you don't understand what I'm saying so much, hopefully the Zoom is making note of my words properly. But anyways, we do have all sorts of events coming up. So if y'all are lacking on those points, we do have many opportunities for you to get them. But I'll go ahead and get started because all of it is listed on the next few slides. Graduation regalia. So if you've graduated in fall 21 this past winter, or will graduate in the upcoming, or this quarter, or in winter or summer, please do fill out this form by Friday so that we can get you a gift card to help you pay for your grad regalia. And this is specifically for our official members or prospective members that are going to be official by spring.
So starting off with our events this week, we're going to have a study session this Thursday. So we know that it's midterm season. So if you want to join us, you can come at any time from 6:30 to 8:30. Yeah, it'll be in person. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you. And I'll pass it on to Tiffany.
For our next event, which is happening actually the upcoming Saturday, is the UCR Campus Beautification with the Student Alumni Association. It's a collaboration, and we will just be cleaning up the campus and keeping it clean, giving back to our community. We'd be meeting in front of North District at 9 a.m. So please do come.
Thank you, Tiffany. And we do have a workshop coming up soon as well. This is happening next Tuesday. So I know y'all be stressed with midterms and deadlines and whatnot. So it's a nice way to learn how to manage your stress, but also de-stress too, and learn how to treat yourself, as it says. Again, that's happening next Tuesday. And
then one activity that our current secretary Paris actually came up with is a scavenger hunt. So in this scavenger hunt, you'll be able to look, general members will be able to look for current and new chapter leaders and board members, and you will be taking pictures with us, and pretty much you'll be getting activity points for like a certain number of people you find. There will also be hints on Instagram so that it'd be easier for you to find us. So just be on the lookout on our Instagram story for more information and the hints. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. And
yeah, and another activity that social that we're really excited for is the inter-chapter social, where you'll get to meet people from different Psych chapters. So this will be happening during week 5, April 28th. So make sure to join us if you want to meet other people from Psych chapters.
And if I could have one of our co-leads, Jess, come up to talk about inductions.
Hello, everyone. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the spring induction ceremony. And so every year we always have the ceremony where we'll be celebrating new and graduating members. And so the last day to RSVP is next Monday, April 25th. So please get your RSVPs as soon as possible so we get a head count for dinner. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Free dinner, by the way, so y'all should be there. And if I could have Brandon talk about RSI.
Okay, so if you weren't here last week, abstract submission have been open for about 2 weeks now, and they will be closing on May 1st, so I believe in 2 more weeks. So if you or you happen to know anyone that is interested in presenting at RSpsych this year, definitely share the submission form with them. So here we also have the general timeline of how things are going to be laid out. Yeah. Thank
And
you.
again, it's a free conference, so we encourage you all to attend, if not present your own research. And again, going back to about elections and whatnot, we're still looking for a historian. So, oh, where's the deadline? I'll have to put the deadline again, but I think it's week 6. I believe it's week 6 Friday. So if you are interested, please do come to office hours, email us if you have questions. Feel free to also message us on Discord as well. Again, it is an amazing experience to not only get leadership experience, but also you get to work with some lovely folks here that we still have. So please do run. And if anyone has any questions about all of our announcements and whatnot, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to email us. And I guess we'll go ahead and get started with our panel. Hell yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Halia. I'm also not as tall as Jenna. Great, cool. Awesome. I just want to get started. We have 2 wonderful panelists, and we have Dr. Alex Long and Austin Attaway, who are going to have introduced themselves in just a second. Awesome. Dr. Long, if you can go ahead. Dr. Long, if you can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Ooh. So should I not talk? Should I just type? Oh, okay. We're good now? Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I don't think any of you have ever had me as your TA because I graduated back in 2020. But a little bit background information. I did my undergrad, master's, PhD at UCR, and then that's the highest degree that you could get, right? So I wasn't able to go any further than a PhD. But overall, I think all the experience that I have had at UCR, has really prepared me well to the job that I have now, right? Which is, I'm currently a senior consultant at Deloitte, specifically in workforce transformation, right? So Deloitte is huge, right? We have the biggest market present, right, in the US, really, right? And we're #1 in human capital consulting, right? So for human capital consulting, you can think about stuff like workforce strategies, right? Workforce analytics. How do we create like career paths for companies, for individuals? How do we create competency models, right, for employees, and all that stuff, right? It really collapsed into one area called human capital consulting. But Duffy, stop. That's my dog. Sorry. And prior to my consulting experience, right, I also worked at the Department of Public Social Services over at the County of Riverside as a research specialist. Some of you who've had Dr. Sai before, right? I was one of Dr. Sai's students. So he might have mentioned to you all about this app that he's working on, right? MindTap. So I helped out a little bit, right? I spent a little bit of time working at Leader Amp, which is kind of like an AI leadership assessment company, right? So we work some of the biggest clients that we work with was Facebook, right? Back then it was Facebook, now it's Meta, right? Also with some of you might know Bob Cialdini, right? The guy who talked about like influence, power, and politics, right? So those are some of our biggest clients. And then before that, I was a graduate intern at State Farm, right? So I travel all the way over to Illinois back in 2018 or 19, I don't remember, right? It's been way too long. But I've also, had some experience in the academia side, obviously at UCR as a researcher, as a lab manager, as a teaching assistant. And then, I also taught some classes over at Cal Poly Pomona, right? As I was trying to figure things out. But that's me. And I'll pass it over to Austin.
Thanks, Alex. And actually, I had you in IO. You were my TA in IO a while ago. Some of you know me. I got my bachelor's in psych at UCR, got my master's in organizational behavior and evaluation at CGU, and right now my PhD is in progress. So I'm post-coursework right now. So finishing up my portfolio and my dissertation. Some of my dissertation research is going really well. Just got some data back. It's looking good. On top of that, I'm currently the presidency of Life Source Affordable Counseling. That's a mental health clinic, nonprofit mental health clinic based in Riverside. We service, underprivileged communities throughout the Inland Empire in Southern California. I've done some independent consulting projects through the Evaluation Center at CGU and the Claremont Collegiate Colleges. Most of these projects were, 5-6 months, so nothing super long. Not like the high-end projects that Deloitte gets to work on. And Alex is totally right. Deloitte is one of the top consulting firms in the country. So if you are interested in IO psychology, I think Deloitte is a good aspiration. In terms of academic experience, as it says there, I co-founded and am the current lab manager of the Job Lab. It's the Justice and Organizational Behavior Lab at Claremont Graduate University. And I teach statistics and research methods at CSULA right now. I've also been a graduate teaching assistant for master's students in organizational behavior, ethical leadership, organizational development and change. In terms of my applied focus, my main focus is on innovation, organizational development and change, scaling, designing systems and programs and things like that. In terms of my research focus, it's on organizational justice and ethics, so equity in the workplace and things like that.
Awesome, thank you both so much. Super interested to talk to y'all more because it seems like you have very similar yet completely different experiences. So we might as well jump right into it. If anyone has any questions in person, feel free to raise your hand. If you have any questions online, feel free to put it in the chat. You might as well get started. Not with the musical social. That will be happening later though, so that's a good teaser. Perfect. So our first question will be, how did you decide that you were interested in going through the business, organizational, industrial side of psychology, as opposed to maybe the more clinical or routes?
I can start. It was actually taking the IO Psych class with Dr. Sai. I was originally interested in clinical or forensic. I was looking at law and psych and things like that. And before doing my bachelor's in psychology, I was also considering doing business or criminology. And then I took an IO psychology class, the class specifically with Sai, and then also his seminar and leadership class. And it just really resonated with me. And I started looking into master's programs and PhD programs in the field. And yeah, it just kind of like called to me at that point.
As for me, so I was a transfer student, right? So some of you might know Mount Sac. So I went to Mount Sac as I was about to transfer, right? I knew that I wanted to go into IO psychology, right? Because one, of course, right? I thought IO psychology is interesting, right? Like you get to, study leadership, you get, like how to improve employee engagement and all that, right? But another factor is also money, right? So those two factors combined, right, allowed me to think about, okay, like in terms of my career, what can I do, right? To one, be in an area that I'm interested in, and two, right, make enough money to support myself. And I came to UCR, met Dr. Sai, became one of his RAs, then later on his graduate students, and we worked on a lot of projects, right? We worked with Zappos, we worked with Army, all these companies, and yeah, I mean, and I know, and for those of you who have taken classes with Dr. Sai, that he was a consultant before, right? So I think it has a really huge impact on some of us, right? Or at least back then, right? As undergrads, as a matter of fact, I had a friend who is also at Deloitte now, who had Dr. Sai as a professor before, right? And he's also doing consulting, right? And but we could talk a little bit about consulting in a little bit, but a little bit different from what I had expected, but that's how I got into human capital consulting.
Awesome. And so, thank you also for dealing with the technical. Okay, thank you for also dealing with technical difficulties. We have two computers going on right now. I probably should have given a heads up about that beforehand. But it is really interesting to hear how you guys chose to go into IO Psych specifically. And you have touched a little bit on your experiences and what you're currently doing. So how would you describe your current positions to someone that knows nothing about IO psychology?
My default for people who have absolutely no idea what IO psychology is, and there's quite a few people who have no idea what it is every time. It's like, I'm an IO psychologist. Oh, what's that? I think it's a bad example, but the closest thing is like being a clinical psychologist for organizations. Coming in, I mean, sometimes, you know, they know exactly what they want. Sometimes it's leadership coaching. Sometimes it's a specific program or analysis, whatever it may be. And I think Alex could probably speak to this better through some of Deloitte's projects. But you're coming in, you're diagnosing the problem, and you're proposing solutions and recommendations, and then helping, you know, potentially even implement those solutions or interventions.
Yeah, so adding to that, like before I came into Deloitte, I thought, oh, you know, like my studies in IO, right, will prepare me like 100%, right, for these consulting projects. But human capital consulting is so huge. Most people who are in consulting, they're not IO psychologists, right? They are your MBAs, right? So they approach the problem differently than like your typical IO person, right? Like you come in, you do a lot less IO stuff than you anticipated that you would do, right? So oftentimes it's about, again, I think often, you know, mentioned about, yeah, there's a problem, you look at it, what's the problem? Now go fix it, right? But the way that you fix things, right, in human capital consulting is going to be different from an IO standpoint, right? Because oftentimes, you know, clients might have like budget issue, right? They're not going to have time to, you know, allow you to build them for like half a year, right? So then you'll have to find ways to quickly fix things for them in the most efficient way, where, okay, you know, we fixed 30% of the problem, you know, let's go, right? If they're satisfied with it, then okay, that's awesome, right? If not, they might ask for like a, you know, for us to add on like additional time to help them out. But then again, you know, Deloitte bill our clients a lot. So depending on whether or not it's worth it, they might decide to go with it, you know, or not.
Since we've talked a little bit about what you do, hopefully everyone is on the same page. What do you enjoy the most and the least about working in your field?
The most probably the problem solving, and you know, every context is different. I think that's why what really drew me to IO psychology or being a consultant. The least probably the kind of what Alex was touching on, how it's not everything that you're learning in your degree. It's more at a more basic level, and there's sometimes a lot of politics in it, which can be kind of frustrating when you're like, I know how to fix this perfectly, but there's too many barriers.
Yeah, I echo some of that too. But I guess for me, what I enjoy the most, I can talk about in terms of the job itself and the company, right? Again, like Deloitte is huge. Deloitte relies a lot on networking, right? And I love networking. You meet different people. As a matter of fact, you know, the type of projects that you get to work on really depends on who you know, right? If I know, let's say, the senior manager, right, really well, guess what? When a project comes along, right, at Google, he's like, hey, Alex, are you free? You know, can you help out, right? Whereas, you know, I don't have to go through like the whole interviewing process. By the way, when you get hired to Deloitte, right, you get hired into a talent pool. You don't get hired into a specific team. So like once you're in this talent pool, you have to go interview for different teams, right, to be staff on the project, right? That's not the toughest part, right? But then I'll get to what I hate the most about consulting in a bit. But at Deloitte, or I guess consulting in general, it's really flexible, meaning we could do our job anywhere, anytime we want. That depends, right? Anytime meaning you could work 12 hours a day, right? But you just have to manage it, depending on who you work with, what projects you're on, you will have to manage it. What I hate the most, right, about consulting is utilization, right? So I'm pretty sure most of you might not have any idea about utilization, right? In consulting, you have certain hours that you'll need to hit every year, right? Like for example, you need to hit like 1,600 hours, client billable hours a year in order to meet your target, right? Because ultimately these hours are the target set by Deloitte or any other consulting firm to make sure that you're earning money, right? For the company, for the firm, right? But then again, right, when I first joined Deloitte, I literally spent a month, right, looking for projects, right, on the bench, right? Meaning we're on the bench interviewing for jobs, but then people go with different senior consultants, for example, right? But then once you get on a project, right, my first project was a 3-month project, right? Once that's almost done, you got to start looking for another project, right? But then if you are unable to find a project, that perfectly, starts right after your project, meaning you're going to have gaps, right? So that's going to hit you. You're going to take a hit on your utilization. That's going to hurt your, I guess, your performance, right? So that's what I hate the most about consulting. But if you're self-employed, right, like Austin, then you might not have that problem, right?
That's super interesting to hear because, as you mentioned, Austin, you're self-employed, and Alex, you're working on a bunch of different projects as well. And I do see a question in the chat from Patty asking, what does a typical workday or week look like for you, especially since you're kind of in those different spheres?
It's kind of hard to answer that question, because I also teach and do research. What's like Alex said, one of the best things is that it is flexible. Kind of do it on your own time, wherever you want. So I've done a very great job since the beginning of the pandemic, also curating my CEO position into a mostly remote job now, which is nice. So a day in the life is really just addressing everything that I need to address at different times of the day as it comes up, aside from when I have to teach, and I work everything around that schedule. But it really is just trying to find that work-life balance between time management of all the things that I have to do and get done in a timely manner versus, working 120 hours a week.
Yeah, for me, again, every week's different, but assuming that I'm staff on the project, right? Like by default, or I'm gonna work 40 hours, right? At least, right, on a project. And then these are billable hours, right? But then what's also annoying about consulting, if you're working for one of these consulting firms, is that they expect you to do firm initiatives, right? Like kind of like your extracurriculum, right? Like what you're all doing, right? You are in psych-hi, right? It's not required for your graduation, but like it's going to look good, right, on your resume. So same thing here, right? Do you want a bigger bonus, right? Do you want to meet more people? Do you want to make an impact, right, at the firm? You'll need to do like extra stuff, right? So then on top of your 40 hours, who knows, right? Depending on what you're signing up for, you might be working, I don't know, extra hours, right? Like on, for example, I worked on an initiative on like what we call the future of future work, right? Meaning what's next, right, for the future work, right? Some of you might have heard of the term, the Great Resignation, right? Like that was like a big theme, right? So we're trying to figure out what's next, right? For the working world. You know, but then it's really up to you, like what to pick. And you know, but then oftentimes when you're new, you get pulled into all these different firm initiatives, and you're afraid to say no, and which I did. And I fully regret saying yes to everything. Like at one point, I was like, okay, I gotta quit on this. And I told them, hey, sorry, you know, I just simply don't have time for this, right? So yeah, so on top of that, you might have proposals, right? So again, that's like extra work, extra hours that you'll need to put in on top of your regular working hours. You gotta win money you're gonna win work for Deloitte, especially if you go up, right? Manager and up, your primary job is really, you know, working on proposal, winning, you know, cases and whatnot for the firm. Yeah.
Awesome. I do see a couple questions in the chat as well. I'm really glad the ball is rolling. So again, if anybody does have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. But one of them is, what opportunities has your PhD opened up for you in comparison to just a master's or a bachelor's degree? Is there a difference between consulting with a PhD versus straight out of undergrad?
You could probably speak better to this, Alex, but my intuition is telling me that you're not going to get many consulting jobs with just a bachelor's degree. You need at least that bare minimum master's degree, either an MBA, master's in leadership, master's in IO, master's in org behavior, something like that. I think what the PhD brings to it is just, it's probably minimal when you talk about consulting, more around the maybe statistics and method stuff. But when it comes to consulting, they're looking, I mean, it's not going to be that big of a difference between an MBA or a master's in IO.
Yeah, so like Austin said, right, you're not going to do much with just a bachelor in consulting unless, right, one, all these consulting firms are looking for, you know, hiring bachelors, of course, right? But you got to be from a target school, right? Which I think it's a bad practice, right? You know, there's a lot of issue with that because guess what? You know, like richer people tend to attend Ivy League, right? So I think, you know, some firms have started to change that practice where they're gonna, you know, cast their net, you know, in other places as well and try to get the top 1%. For example, I don't know, from UCR, I don't know. But by the way, UCR, Deloitte does come to UCR to recruit, but they are solely focusing on, I think, IT consulting. Okay, because when I was back in when I was still doing my PhD, I went to one of their information session, and they're like, "Sorry, we're not, you know, not looking to hire human capital folks at UCR." But then in consulting, you know, human capital consulting, you're gonna make the most money not with a PhD, but with an MBA from a recognizable school, right? You'll be surprised, right, how much difference in salary an MBA, right, will earn versus any other people without an MBA, right? We're talking about when you come in, let's say you do your MBA, you come back, right? I think the average for Deloitte is 170 a year, okay, with an MBA as a senior consultant, okay? But of course, there's like other factors too, like what practice are you in, right? Are you in human capital? Are you in strategy or whatnot, okay? But PhD consulting in general, I mean, it's cool that people are like, hey, you know, this guy's got a PhD, okay, right? Or I work with a Ivy League school, right? So an Ivy League school was our client, right? Then, you know, it might show them some credibility, right? Like, oh, you know, we got folks who are in higher ed too, right? Like if a doctor, blah, 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 right? So yeah, so those are the main, you know, differences.
And I do see a question for Austin in the chat. What and
Yeah.
how long did it take to start a nonprofit organization? Specifically, were there any resources you had to utilize?
Yeah, so I actually took over the nonprofit. I was elected to president of the board, and then shortly after that, I was director of communications. Then became president of the board. It was a very small nonprofit at the time. It's still, in comparison to most nonprofits, relatively small. It's now moderate size. But when I took over, there was only about 6 employees. Now we're just pushing over 40, which is nice. So we are steadily growing. Benefit of that has been the pandemic, unfortunately, and teletherapy and things like that. But there are tons and tons of resources available for nonprofits, especially in the state of California. So starting a nonprofit, you can usually get it done within about a year, year and a half in the state of California. There's lots of stuff on the department. There's a government website specifically that has like all the documents outlined. When I took over, they were like already all in a folder though. And it usually can be done in about a year, year and a half. And then there's decent amounts of funding sources, but then you're going to need to rely on volunteers and things like that when you're starting off. Yeah, does that answer the question? Or any follow-ups to that?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear how you kind of like climbed your way up, for lack of a better phrase, through these different positions. Did you see another question in chat that has to do with your extracurriculars? So we're talking a lot about where you are now and how y'all are enjoying that. But from your experience in undergrad, was there a specific experience that you found to be most impactful as you were on your IO journey?
The quick one is just I was president of Sci-Chi there at UCR. That would be probably the main one. Was also president of Sci-Chi at my graduate university of CGU. Yeah, president of Sci-Chi. You're all in Sci-Chi, so you get it. Jenna can speak to it, I'm sure. But go ahead, Alex.
For me, I focused more on the research route, knowing that I was going to grad school and coming in as a transfer student. By the way, when I first came in, I had no idea what I needed to do. So I didn't do any research in my 3rd year, then realized, oh crap, I got to do something, right? So I worked in 4 labs during my last year. So Dr. Tsai's lab, right? Some of you might know Mary Govain, Steve Clark, and Larry Rosenblum, right? So surprisingly, all 4 labs are like in completely different areas, right? But despite working in 4 different labs, I think the most valuable things I've learned was really not only the research side, but like how to work with different people, right? Even though it's only research. So then I was able to, learn different methods, do all these labs. And then obviously when I came in as a graduate student, I already knew a lot of people, right? And then I didn't really have that adjustment period like a lot of those other undergrads, coming in from a different university. Yeah.
Kind of on the same topic with undergrad, I do see another question in the chat asking, is there anything you would do differently in your journey if you could go back in time?
Maybe minor in like business or financial engineering or something. Maybe focus a little bit more on statistics. Now I teach statistics, but it was quite a grind through my master's to get to that level because I was not good at it in undergrad. So yeah, those would probably be the 2 things for me.
Yeah, so for me, no. I think, I'm not saying that all the stuff that I did was right, but what I'm saying is even the stuff that I did wrong, right, it was, kind of helped me become the person I am now, right? I applied to a ton of places, right? I got rejected by Deloitte, dozen of times, right? But I still ended up here, right? But that, again, maybe we'll stick to it later on, but referrals, right? Referrals really, really important, right? Again, it's about, who you know, right? If you don't know anyone, you didn't get a referral and you apply to a job, and you get rejected, you might feel sad, but ultimately, who knows, right? Your resume, your application might not even, no one even has seen it maybe, right? So if you ever get rejected, don't feel bad. But yeah, I don't really, I wouldn't do anything differently. Yep.
I do see another question that did come into the chat, I think kind of on that topic, which is speaking of referrals, what's a great way to network or gain connections?
I mean, like Sci-Chi is great. You're all seeing each other, but that kind of doesn't give you good connections that are above you, right? Like mentors, research labs, kind of like what Alex was talking about earlier. Great opportunity to connect with graduate students. Beyond that, LinkedIn, you know, when you're looking at companies on LinkedIn that you're interested in applying to, you can see if alumni or people from your university worked there. You can always connect with those individuals and reach out to them. You're more of a networking guy than I am, Alex, so I'll punt it to you.
I hated networking before, right? When I was undergrad, you know, like even when I took Dr. Sai's IO class, right? I always said, you know, really in the middle section, right? Because you're not up front where, you know, professors are gonna have like direct interactions with you, but you're also not at the back where professors know that you're, you know, slacking off, right? But then I kind of forced myself throughout grad school, right? I attended, you know, as grad students, we go to all these different conferences, right? I mean, I've attended, you know, PsyOp, right? The one for IO, Academy of Management, the one for business school, and SPSP, right? Which is the one for social personality psychology. So I attended all three of them in my first year, and, you know, I really found, you know, the connection, right, between, you know, me and other folks at PsyOp, right, the one for IO, because IO people are more fun, right? I mean, in comparison to Academy of Management, right, which is straight up academics, you know, business school, and then SPSC, they're like way into, you know, posters. And, you know, again, you know, I'm from, you know, the social personality program, but then PsyOp was the only one with really practitioners, right? You see, you know, like people from Amazon, you see people from, you know, Coca-Cola, right? Google, right? And then people go there just to have fun, right? And even though I presented my research there, you know, like their happy hours, you know, people, you know, stay up until like 2, right? Whereas like in other conferences, people don't stay up that late, right? And people have business cards, right? And then people actually use LinkedIn, right? Whereas the other two, no one cared about anything. So for me, it was me getting myself into those situations, right? Talking to people, you know, crashing other people, other universities, you know, social, you know, through friends. And, you know, the person who actually referred me to Deloitte, right? I met her back during my second year of grad school in the conference, right? And now we became really good friends, right? And you know, we worked together for a while, and then she left, right? She's like director of something over at Macy's, right? But then, you know, like Austin says, you obviously could use LinkedIn, but then, you know, don't expect like, hey, you know, I see this random person who works at Google. Hey, can you give me a referral, right? You know, try to build that relationship first. You know, over time, you know, as you two, I guess, know each other a little bit more, you know, people are more willing to open up. They're like, hey, you know, would you be willing to provide me with a or a referral, right? Or at times, who knows, right? People might just reach out, right? If they know you well enough, hey, you know, let me know if you're applying to anything over at Google, right? I could give you a referral, right? So something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear. I think a lot of students, especially like networking, sounds like a really horrible, daunting thing. And in some ways it is, just because, I don't know, it just seems like a lot. So it's really nice to hear from people who have had to network a little bit just to get where they are. And kind of speaking again about where they are and just advice to undergrads, if someone was interested in getting involved in IO psychology and didn't really know where to start, what advice would you give to them?
I mean, Alex, I'm sure you could best speak to this being in Sci's lab, but if you're all UCR students, which I'm sure you all are because you're here, Sci's lab would probably be the best first place.
Yeah, but having said that, right, it's not necessary. I mean, because Dr. Sai only has that many spots, right,
Right.
for RAs. Any research lab would do, really, right? Because again, like all the methods, all the statistics that you do, right, in Sai's lab, it's the exact same stuff than, with the stuff that you run in like Larry's lab, for example, right? I guess when you're applying for like grad school as an example, you could showcase that, hey, I have a great foundation of these skills, right? But then my interest is actually in leadership, right? Therefore, I could apply these methods, whatever, in this topic over at this grad school. At UCR, let's see what else. I don't think I don't know if the business school have labs at UCR, but I know they do have grad students. And well, so for some of you who may be in honors or whatever, I did have a student at an RA who had his honor thesis with Iling Wong over at the business school, right? So again, it's not just Scilab, right? You could obviously reach out to people in the business school, right, and see if there's a fit, and they could provide you with like advice on your thesis or whatnot, because ultimately IO and OB, right, organizational behavior over at the business school, they are the same thing, right? It's just that one is in the business school, one is in the psychology. So
Awesome. And I do want to give a little bit of a heads up to everybody in person and online. I see a question. I'll call on you in a second. That we do have about 10 minutes left. So if there's anybody on Zoom who has had questions so far, please send in the chat. I just see one in person, Jackie. Okay. Yeah, okay, cool. So one of our members is wondering, what exactly does a project consist of, I believe, when you're working in consulting, like a consulting project? Kind of like what you were mentioning a little bit earlier in the meeting. And Austin or Alex or both can feel free to touch on this.
They can be so many things. They're incredibly diverse and context dependent. So just two specific examples. I did a cultural analysis for a e-commerce clothing company because they were a startup and looking to scale, and they didn't have any organizational culture, so to speak, and wanted to know where they're at and how can they, implement as they move to a new office, different practices and policies to build on that culture. Contrasting that with a different project that I've been on, one for a casino and resort, where they were looking for help with behavioral interviewing and their onboarding process and scaling that up because they were looking to hire another 1,000 employees for hospitality jobs. So very, very, very different projects, very, very different timelines, and different individuals, and what me and my team needed to bring to it.
yeah, so again, I echo what Austin was saying, right? Like these projects could be different, right? Obviously, bigger projects cost more. I would start with a small one, right? So I worked on, this job architecture project, right? What does job architecture mean, right? Like, what do what are the job structure should look like, right? Like, how many positions should we have, right? What type of job title, right, should fall under, different job families, right? You can think about like IT, accounting and all that, right? So it was a small project, right? It was, just pretty much 4 people, right? We've got like a partner on the account. We got, a manager overseeing the whole thing. And then you got me as senior consultant, and you got a consultant, right? Small team, right? And then there was like a 3-month project. Alternatively, you might have another project that I work with, an organization within security. We had 3 different, four, right, four work streams, right? I was on the human capital work streams, right? Like figuring out, the competency modeling for these employees. And then we have one for strategy. We have one for like, implementation. We have one for some other stuff, right? So, and that's not too big of a team. Sometimes you might have like a huge transformation project. You might need like people who's doing change management. You might need like people who's doing training and development. You might need people who are doing all sort of stuff, right? Coming in at the same time, working with different people within the same organization, right? So again, it's really different depending on a different project and scale.
So interesting to hear about the couple of types of projects that y'all mentioned. I'm really curious to know if you've had a favorite company or a favorite project that you've done so far.
One project, just because it's closer in line with the type of consulting that I want to do, which is change management. They were building out an entire new department and actually shifting between 10 and 20% of their workforce from other departments into this department. And so that's a pretty big change. It was fun working with all of those employees and those managers as well. They wanted to do it pretty quickly over 5 months for something like that. Usually maybe a year is better. So we were boots on the ground. It was quick moving. We had a team of about 8 different consultants. Yeah, it was a fun one. It was stressful, but it was fun.
For me, right, from my perspective, your experience on a specific project highly depends on, I would say it depends less on what you do, but more about, who are you working with and, how the client is like, right? Because I was on this one project where, okay, it's kind of aligned with what I want to do, right? But then the client was, wasn't, the best client ever, right? Team was good, but then that had a huge impact on, whether or not this is a good project for me, right? Even though the subject itself is something that is aligned with what I'm doing. Whereas this other project, again, like the higher ed project, right? The job architecture project, like I personally, I don't really care much about job architecture because that's more, it's not the type of stuff that I want to do within IO. Like for me personally, it's more about leadership, right? And all that. But then it was more about like the organization. But it was a great experience because the team was great. The client side was great because for the client side, they've never done anything like that. And on top of that, our clients in higher ed, they look to, like the tech companies, right? For example, right? They're like, oh, what's Google doing, right? For this kind of stuff, right? Versus like if I've been on government projects before, right? They're looking at like, okay, what's other federal agencies, right, doing? And the client that we had was really great, very responsive, and they're also a little bit laid back, right? But again, I'm not saying this particular, I'm not saying like higher ed as the best client, because I know at this other school, right, within California, people have terrible experience with them, right? But again, if it's the same project, different client, I'm gonna have a different, experience. So that's my take on it.
And speaking about people that you're working with, we do see a question in the chat talking about some of the characteristics that someone that wants to go into consulting needs. So what are they, and are these traits mostly innate or can they be learned as well?
I mean, I'm sure we can get into a whole personality debate about if they can be trained or if they're innate. Personally, I think somebody who has, high ambition, self-starter, works well in ambiguity, I think is a big one. Can handle stress well, those kind of things. But beyond that, I mean, if you really, really want to do it, I'm sure you can find a place for yourself within IO psychology, because there's a lot of different positions.
Yeah. On top of that, I guess like willingness to not only just take on feedback, but also seek feedback. Because I think that depending on where you come in, right? Like, because like obviously if you come fresh out of undergrad, you're gonna come in at an analyst, right? And then like you're at the lowest level of the organization. Obviously, you know, you're gonna be doing what other people are telling you to do, right? But then as you climb up, let's say, you know, if you're, for me, a senior consultant, you know, you could really try to shape that experience for yourself, where, you know, try to build that rapport with your teammates. You know, like I know, you know, work with a consultant before, right? Where the first thing I ask, hey, what can I do to make your life easier, right? You know, what are your strengths? Like, what do you want to learn, right, throughout this project, right? Like, oh, do you want more of a speaking role? Because usually it's the senior consultant who's doing most of the speaking role, right, at clients meeting, right, or like at a bigger team meeting. But you know, if you want, right, because at Deloitte, people like to see that you're operating at the next level, right? Meaning if you're a consultant, you should be operating as a SC, right? Senior consultant. So, you know, what opportunities do you want? And let me provide that opportunity for you. Guys, vice versa, where, you know, once you do that, you kind of open up, you know, I guess providing more like such psychological safety for other people, and they're more willing to speak up when something goes wrong, right? Obviously be a, you know, team player, right? Try to help out one another if you can. But yeah, so just on top of what Austin was saying, those are some of the key important aspects.
And I do think we have time for one more question before we break today. So if there's any one thing that you wanted undergrads to take away from tonight's meeting, what would it be?
That's hard. I'd probably say, you know, first find out if this is the field that really resonates for you and that this is the direction you want to go. You know, I think one of the last things you want to do is end up in a graduate program or in a high level job position that you don't love and that you don't enjoy that type of work for.
For me, I would say I would go beyond consulting, but I would say try to experience more stuff, right, before you settled in, right? Like for me, and I remember when I first coming to grad school, I was like, oh, I'm gonna be, you know, a practitioner, right? Year one, I'm gonna go into consulting practitioner, right? And then year two, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a professor, right? And that sounds pretty sweet. I just get tenured, and then, you know, I could work on something else, right, in my free time. And then third year, I was like, oh no, I want to become a practitioner. So I go back and forth with different things. That's why you see, you know, I've taught classes, right, just to experience it. But for me personally, right, I remember like this one day when I was in Cal Poly Pomona's parking lot walking towards the classroom, I was like, oh, this is like, can I do this for the next 20 or 30 years, right? Doing the same thing over and over again. But the answer was no. So it was clear to me that, hey, you know, academia is not for me, right? And then I also experienced it, you know, on the practitioner side, where I did a internship, right, over at State Farm. I was like, oh yeah, wow, I could actually see, you know, the impact, right, that I'm creating by spending just like what 2-3 months, right, at State Farm, right? That's why that kind of helped me gear towards, you know, the applied side. So I would say, you know, you all still have the time, trying to experience as much as you can, right? Because you never know, right? Again, you know, that's why you should date more people, right? Because like you're not gonna like date one person, this is it, right? Because you don't know what's out there. But I'm married, by the way. Today's my first day back at work. I just got a newborn. And I've been with my, now wife for over 10 years, right? So despite telling you all to date more people, but I'm just using that as an example, right? You don't know what's out there until you actually try it. So if you have experienced enough, you're not going to regret it like 20, 30 years from now.
Awesome. Well, that was our last question. I wanted to thank you both so much for coming, for talking to us, not just about IO Psych, but also just about your experiences, what you're doing now. I know I found it really informative, and I really liked hearing about the problem-solving creative aspect that I wasn't really aware of before that. But yeah, thank you again. And for those of you that are in person, or for those of you that are online, our next general meeting is in 2 weeks, and it's psychology and medicine. In the meantime, we do have our musical socialist coming up. So we're going to end the recording, and have a great rest of your day.